Welcome to the following of the Django tutorials about how to create a chart in Django. And as you can remember, in the previous tutorial, we managed to complete the chart.html, and there are a few things that I need to edit inside of the code. So as you can remember, we had data.chart label here and chart label with the small c here. But here we instead of the dataset label, we had written chart label with the capital C. So make sure you convert it to small c. And there is a small change that we need to make on the view. So if you can remember from our previous tutorial, we had the function-based view. Right now we decided to convert it to a class-based view in order to be able to use API view from the REST framework.views, and also from the REST framework.response be able to use that one as well. Actually, we did get this one. We need to get import from Django.views.generic import view. So using the class-based view solved our problem because it wouldn't, the code wouldn't run that way. So the function that we have inside of the home class, which uses the view attributes, is get. And so we will return render request chart.html. Also inside of your class chart. So this one renders the home page, the first one, and the second one will use the REST API in order to send a response. So the rest of the code is the same as before, exactly the same, and there's no difference. Even this one, we have return render request chart.html, and there's also another change we need to make here inside of our urls.py, and that is using the views.asView, kind of a writing, because in a function-based views we had views.name of the function, but right now we need views.name of the class.asView, and that's the other change that we've made. Also make sure you add the slash after the API. So actually what I've done, if you have noticed the name of the project has changed. Doesn't really matter what name you put on it, but if you're curious about it, I decided to create another project from scratch. I did it another time, and I tried to solve the problems, and right now we're ready to run the project, so run the server. And by the way, I added some data to the database other than the ones that we had in the previous project. So about 10 blood pressure data has been added to our database, and now we're ready to run our server. But the first thing we need to do is to activate our virtual environment. So cd --, to get back to the bin folder, and then if you're on Windows, you need to use the scripts folder. You need to get into scripts folder. If you're on Linux, you'll use source space /activate, and if you're on Windows, you'll use activate or activate.bat. So we'll activate the virtual environment, and we'll cd back to the my chart folder, or as we named in the previous tutorial, chart folder. Doesn't really matter what name you put on it. So now we can run the server by running python manage.py that's py run server, and here we go. Now let's follow the link, and let's get into our browser. And as you can see, we have the chart here with the labels related to the exact time of recording the data. We imagine that the way we've recorded data has been daily, but actually, as you can see, they are just consecutively recorded here, and as you can see, it's just around 120, which is a normal blood pressure. the first number. You can see the borders, you can also see the area under the border of the chart. So right now we managed to create the chart line. You can also add the bar graph as well. Also, if you add some data to the database by heading over to the admin panel, and there we are, and you can add some data to the database and the chart will immediately be updated. So for example, here I enter 145, press enter or click on the save. As you can see, it's been saved. I can add as many as I want and it will be applied. So here, for example, I can add 89 and save this. And as you can see, it's been saved. So now we can get to our home page and check what has happened. Right over here, as you can see, the data has been updated and we have 145 and also 89. If you click on the dots, you will be able to see the exact data with the number 89, blood pressure record 89, and the exact time related to the recording of the data. So that's a perfect kind of a system for recording data, and it will immediately apply the updates on the chart. So we will map the database to our chart. So the next step is to complete our charts.html and add the function for bar graph, for having a bar graph. So imagine that we want this chart to be a bar graph as well next to this chart. So what we can do here is to first of all add another canvas for our blood pressure with the ID for bar graph, and also create another function for the bar graph in order to get the data and present that to the user using the chart.js library. So now let's continue with the rest of the project and let us complete the bar graph. But before we want to do that, we need to consider a place where the bar graph is going to be placed. Right now, as you can see, this whole chart is nearly in the middle, but we might need to have these two next to each other inside one row. So first of all, we need to stop the server by pressing Ctrl+C and write clear in order to clear the terminal. And then the next thing we want to do is to delete this div tag and also its counterpart. And now what we need to do is to write column-6 and add another div tag for our new canvas, which is for our bar graph. So we're gonna do that, and exactly the same class is needed, but here we need to write a different ID for our canvas. So I can call this BP for blood pressure, BP, and then I can say BP bar graph. And here we go. So now the next thing we need to do is to add the function that we're going to develop. But right now, let's write the name of the function. For example, we want to call this bar graph. And so we have a data for our bar graph, so with our API, and we have an ID which is BP hyphen, and then after BP we have bar graph, and next up we need to complete the function for the bar graph. So the name here is bar graph, so let's keep that and use it down below here after our function right over here. So in just the same line. So we had the function and bar graph data ID. So here we are. We need to do the same. So function, bar graph, data and ID. So let's open up the block in JavaScript. And it's true that this is a Python tutorial, but you need to know a bit JavaScript at sometimes, because sometimes when you're working with Django, you might need some JavaScript code. But if you don't understand anything, do not be worried about that. You can just follow along with the tutorial and focus on the Python section and just copy and paste these codes. So for this function, I'm gonna do the same, and so I'm gonna copy and paste all of the contents of this function and make some changes to the function and use it as a bar graph. So in a bar graph, first of all, let's start from the beginning. And by the way, let me fix all of these too. And here we are. And also let me fix the options, because the options that we used to have right above, right over here, was just a line away from the variables. Or we can just shift back all of these variables. And so, okay, let me fix everything. Oh, what happened? Just 2 spaces are enough. So the indentation doesn't matter in JavaScript, as I've told you before, but I'm really careful about that, because that helps you save a lot of time, especially when you want to be able to quickly read through the function and understand everything. So right over here, I think we have one of the blocks that we don't need. Yes, that's true, because we opened one and we pasted everything afterwards. So the first thing we need to do is to get the labels, chart label, chart.label. So the data are the same, but the way we want to represent the data is different. So it was a line chart. So here is a bar graph. So the type changes to bar. And also, so let me check everything. So everything is the same, and so the ID is the ID that we get from our function. And the next thing we need to change here is, okay, we need an array of RGB values, right? Because we have different bars, and each different bar needs a different color. You can set all of them the same. You can write a for loop in JavaScript. But right here, because most of the people who are viewing this video are Python developers, and they do not know a lot about JavaScript, I'm not gonna make it more complicated than what it is, and I'm not gonna use a for loop in order to loop through this and create an array of RGB values. I'm gonna write all of the array, the total array right here. Notice that it's a much better way if you write a for loop, because we have a dynamic data. The data is being added up just every day or every moment. So if, for example, right now we have 12 data, then the data might be added the next day and the next day. So this RGB array of RGB values must be a dynamic one, not a static one. So if we define a kind of array that has a fixed value of items, then this wouldn't solve the problem. So right now, the next thing, these two needs to change, but the next thing that I must change here is we don't have x-axis. Actually, we have x-axis, but not in a continuous way. So we don't need to include it here in the bar graph. So just opposite to what we had inside of the line chart. We don't have x-axis for the bar graph, and everything else is the same except for these two, background color and border color. In order to save the time, I've added all of the arrays by myself, and there are 12 of items determining each one of them determining the RGB value. And now we're ready to run our server and check our bar graph. So now let's do it. We can run python manage.py run server, and now let's follow the link, and here refresh it one more time, and as you can see we have the bar graph, right? So here we have the times of the recording the data, and we have the bar graph. We have blood pressure record or samples. So right here we can write, for example, bar graph for this one, line chart for this one. So let me add them up here. So so instead of the label, we need to change it instead of the label, because we've got it from the, because we had got it from the data that we got from our API. The first one was okay, and the second one we can add a value for ourselves. So here we can write, okay, here we can write bar graph for blood pressure samples. There are triple S's here, blood pressure samples. So let's save this and let us refresh. So bar graph for blood pressure samples, this is the label, and the label for this one is derived from the API that we wrote. So you might wonder that why this one is a bit to the right, the two graphs, and the reason is these writings are a bit to the left, so we need enough space for these to be in there. But otherwise they would have been in the center. So for example, if it would have been the date itself without considering the time, exact time, it would have been here. We can filter the time and only include the date or only include the time. This is your own option. You can do this in Python. So that's it for this part of the tutorial, and you can add as many other charts as you want below this. And so we're done with this part of the tutorial.